Well, hello, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Dwayne Butcher with Lean Frontiers, and I will serve as your host today. Before we begin, I have a couple of housekeeping notes. If you have questions today throughout the webinar, you can submit them using the GoToWebinar toolbar. And as questions do come to mind, go ahead and submit them as they come to mind, and then we'll, at the end of the session, have an opportunity for Gene to address those questions. Also, look for an email from me following today's presentation. The email will provide details of the inaugural Lean HR Summit being held in Orlando, November of next year, and there'll be some additional links and information available as well. Well, let me introduce today's presenter, Gene Cunningham. Gene is widely recognized as one of the pioneers of lean accounting and lean beyond manufacturing. Her pioneering efforts were chronicled in some of Lean's earliest books. She is former Vice President and CFO at Lantec, Inc. and Marshfield Door Systems. Gene was one of the original thought leaders for the Lean Accounting Summit and continues to be a key figure in that event. She's also one of the key drivers of the aforementioned Lean HR Summit. I should also mention that she's authored 2 Shingo Prize-winning books, Real Numbers and Easier, Simpler, Faster. So without further ado, let me turn things over to Gene.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Gene Cunningham. As Dwayne said, I'm so glad that you are interested in this really important topic of applying how the HR function really can help support the lean effort at your companies. And Dwayne, augmenting the slides for some reason isn't working well.
Yeah, that happened. There we go.
I got it. Sorry. Dwayne has already introduced me, and I just wanted to add that in my roles at both Lantec and Marshfield Door Systems, in addition to being CFO, the information systems and HR functions also reported to me, and so I'm really talking to you today based on my experience, inside 2 companies that had significant transformation of how they operated, how they grew, how they improved performance with Lean. I wanted to start with just talking just briefly about what is Lean, where does it come from, for those of you that might not be quite as familiar. The word Lean really is talking about some ways of thinking about our business that we've learned from the automotive industry. Just basically, early 1900s when Ford began the car, building their cars, they started at the very beginning sort of as tinkerers, or they were called fitters. Basically, the parts, might be random from car to car, and really the gate to producing more cars was the ability to have really good fitters. These people that had really strong, deep technical expertise of how to really take these parts and make them fit together so that you could actually have a car that worked. So each car was very, very custom in that regard. And if you had problems later, you might or might not, you couldn't just call up like we do now and say, hey, I need this, part for my 2001 Highlander. I mean, you'd have had to have a, real expert who could create the part that would fit with all the other parts in your car. One of the big innovations that Ford put in place was the idea of standard parts. And this is one of our first inklings or tentacles of Lean that we can look back to the automotive industry, which is about creating standard ways to do work. Henry Ford also hired Fred Taylor, and he was a industrial engineer, and he developed the scientific method. And what that really meant was that they would observe the workers doing the work, and then they would kind of go away and in the closet in the engineering room and say, hey, here's how we could do it better, and then they would come out and tell the workers how to do it. Well, there's a few tentacles of Lean there too, but one very big difference. One is that we try to observe our current way of doing all of our work, whether it be in the office or whether it be in the factory, before we begin to change it. We always want to be rooted in what's going on right now. One big difference, though, is the Fred Taylor approach did not really strongly engage really what I call the genius of our workforce, is the people, really talking with people about what could be made better. With these changes, the cost per unit came down dramatically, opening up, and the speed of producing products improved, making the automotive industry more accessible. other people began to enter the automotive industry, and there were a lot of competitors. Now, over in Japan, after World War II, Toyota, which was an offshoot of the Toyota family of products, the son actually started an automotive company, and they had very restricted amount of resources, and there were a lot of labor problems. And so, the idea of, having a lot of people and having a lot of access to the raw materials of an automobile, there wasn't really a whole lot. It was a real constraint on growing their business. They hired this guy named Tashi Ono, and he was also an industrial engineer, and he started applying this thinking of that we really can't have any waste in our business. We can't afford to make cars before customers actually want them because we can't, we don't have access to raw materials. Our labor force is a challenge, and so we only are going to make what customers want. And they began this sort of methodical way of developing what we now know as the Toyota Production System, which later became named Lean Manufacturing. And as the Toyota Production System was developed, they realized that they really could not be successful without engaging all of their suppliers of their parts. And so they began in the 60s and 70s of really engaging their suppliers to understand the Toyota Production System. And then people began to move from the automotive suppliers into other industries and other types of manufacturing. That's what I call on the slide the transplants. And these are the people that moved into other industries that had been exposed to lean manufacturing. And that's really where I was exposed in 1992. We had been a great company and still are a great company at Lantec. They were, but there's a lot more competition, and so we became aware from a supplier transplant from the automotive industry about lean, and we began applying lean. And within a year, we could make a product that used to take 6 weeks to make. We could make it in 15 hours, and very quickly. But it took us over 2 weeks to enter the order, and that's when I had the opportunity to, really say, could we apply what works on the factory floor? Could we actually apply that outside of manufacturing? And it was a lot of fun, and we really made a lot of changes in the business, and we made changes in all areas. And now it's even moved beyond outside of manufacturing into financial services in the hospital. So this is what we call the lean production, lean manufacturing, lean business system. In other words, applying lean not just to manufacturing, but throughout the company. Now, what really differentiates lean from other improvement strategies is that there's really two equal components. One is the idea of continuous improvement. So not just doing the big bang improvement, I'm going to put in this, HRIS system and everything is going to be great, or all I have to do is put in the ERP and, everything will be great, or all I have to do, I'm sure we've all heard that, all you have to do. But it's really about improving things all the time, getting your entire workforce engaged with becoming problem solvers. The other part of it is with respect for people, and we just really talked about the respect for people's intelligence and respect for people's desire to be part of a successful business, and treating, really engaging all employees in this improvement process. The improvement isn't just for an industrial engineer, it isn't just for a senior member of the team, et cetera, but it's really about every person can contribute to the improvement within the company. I really call this the collective genius of the organization and really tapping into it. Now, just to sort of emphasize how important this part is, this is a picture, and I'm not going to go through this whole picture. There's a lot of words and things to learn about lean, and if you're going to be involved with lean, you're going to want to learn some of these words. But I think the really important thing that I want you to notice on this Toyota Production System is to go down at the beginning, down at the first level, and look, it says mutual trust between employees and management being the foundation of the Toyota Production System. And I think as us that are involved with the HR function, I think this is so important for us to understand that lean is built on this trust between employees and management. And if you don't have that trust, if you don't have an engagement, all of these other techniques and items and tools really will not be successful. Now, I wanted to share with you, I've been, in addition to the work that I've done with, at Landtech and at Marshfield Door Systems, the last 6 years I've been consulting and working with a lot of different companies. And I just wanted to share with you kind of what I observe at most companies. And while these are manufacturing titles, I mean, all companies, whether service companies or not, do a form of this. So the normal business process is you develop a product, develop some sort of capability, you promote it, you sell it, you get people interested, and then you get demand, which comes in the form of some kind of an order or a customer that needs something from you. And then you've got to get your parts, your customer engineering together so that you can actually manufacture, you ship it, and then you get money from it. Now, typically what I see is that most companies start their lean efforts within the manufacturing or the fulfillment stage. Fairly quickly, then, they move up to the actual demand of how do we react to the demand that we're getting, whether it be order entry, order readiness, and really grabbing the voice of the customer of what is it that they want from us and how frequently do they need it. And then you can see the rest of the numbers. Then it goes more back to the shipping area, finance gets involved, and usually, unfortunately, later in the process, selling and R&D gets involved. Although this is not the way it has to be, this is just what I typically see within companies. Now, underlying this transformation that's going on through the business process, we've got three functional areas: information systems, human resources, and accounting, that really support the business across the board. And here's where our opportunity for Lean HR really makes itself obvious. We have to know within the HR function what are the changes that are going on in the business in these other areas so that we can better support their needs and providing what they need in terms of human capability in the organization. Now, similarly, accounting needs to do the same thing, and information system needs to do the same thing. Now, there's one other piece, though, that we can do in these functional areas is we can also say, hey, this methodology that we're using, these way of thinking, this lean thinking, let's apply it to the work that we do within information systems, human resources, and accounting. So this kind of is hopefully to help you lay out that there's really kind of two parts. Let's talk about those two parts a little bit more. I'm going to call them Lean for HR and HR for Lean and talk about kind of the difference between those two. Lean for HR really means taking the tools of lean thinking and apply them to the processes that we do within HR by minimizing our resource use and eliminating waste. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but it's basically about how can we make the things that we do within the HR function more effective. The other side of it is HR for Lean, and this really has to do with HR supporting the changes that are going on in the rest of the organization so that there are not barriers to the lean improvements that are being made and the new way of doing business. And a lot of changes begin to happen in lean companies, and so I'm going to take you through some of those areas that we will see that change within a lean company that HR can really help support in a new way. I've just listed a couple things here. Reporting relationships tend to change fairly quickly in lean companies. In other words, you may have always had a hierarchical organizational relationships, and now you've got what we're calling value streams, which value streams connect up. Just like our prior sequence, it's connecting up these pieces in new ways rather than on a vertical hierarchy, but really across the company. Incentive programs need to change because, as you'll see, and as you'll learn, that it's not about making the most you can make, but really making what customers need and making sure we have alignment. We need to make it easy to move people around and to minimize sort of turf battles as we change how we think about the work that we do. And we really need to create some workplace modifications and create truly an environment of continuous improvement everywhere in the company, and HR's role to help make that happen. So we'll talk about some of those things the rest of this For those of you that might not yet have experience using some of the ways of lean thinking, I'm going to introduce a few of the concepts that might help you as you begin to engage with the rest of the organization with lean. One of the things we talk about a lot is the concept of value add and non-value add. Value add really means that it's the things that we do in our company that transforms either materials or information into something our customers are willing to pay for. It's a very rigid standard in a way. It says what are the key things our customers want, and everything else we say is non-value add. Now, we don't say the people are non-value add. We don't say the people that do those tasks are non-value add, and we don't say the fact that those tasks needed to be done in the past make people bad in terms of how they manage it. It doesn't mean that at all. It just helps us separate between value add and non-value add so we can know what to work on. We also use the term either value enabling or even more frequently non-value add but necessary, which are the things that we really have to do to stay in business, but the customer may care a little less about it. Now let's look at a picture of this. I like pictures a lot better than words. So here's how I think of the picture. On the left-hand side, we have the difference between value add and non-value add, and underneath, necessary and unnecessary. What we try to do in our improvement activities is to say, look, we're not going to worry too much about the value add pieces. We know how to do those fairly well, and we're going to leave that for future improvement. What we really want to do is to help the organization identify what are the things that are non-value add. The things that are non-value add and unnecessary, we want to eliminate right away. We don't want to eliminate the people. We want to eliminate the work so that people can do higher value items. And we want to, on the things that are non-value added but necessary, we want to try to reduce the amount of time and effort that people spend on that so they're available for other things. Now, for HR, what's value add? And I think, we could probably come up with a description something like this. But it's basically that we have the right people in the right seat, at the right skills, at the right time, but complicated by the fact that we've now become a continuous improvement organization. And so right people, right seats, right skills, right time isn't a stable platform. It changes. And that's really where this idea of HR supporting the lean effort is so important, because we've got to create an environment that can allow us to achieve these value-add elements within the company, even though the needs of the company are changing. So think about it. It really takes a strong connection between HR and the rest of the company to achieve this. Now, we talk about waste, and it really found that, waste, whether it's in manufacturing or whether it's in the office, you can kind of categorize them into some topics. And I think this is really helpful because it helps us to see, really where waste is. And this list of 7 wastes are, really common in any of the lean literature that you look at. But it's basically, creating defects, moving around too much, making more than you really need, processing to a level beyond what's really needed. And anyway, these 7 categories help us. And then a lot of companies have added this idea of an 8th waste being really not the waste of not using the collective genius in your organization. So we really want to create this environment where we're creating a place where people can really contribute their knowledge of the business and the knowledge of improvements to be made. And, waste happens not because we've got bad people creating bad processes. It's not that at all. It's really a buildup of changes that are made during the history of the company. So, you start very simple. We have a simple process. Maybe it's this is how we hire people, or we have a simple process. This is how we enter an order, or we have a simple process. So this is how we pay a bill, etc. And then things change. You get a problem, and so you put in another process to kind of deal with that problem. And maybe you have a government requirement that comes in. Maybe you get a new boss who likes to do it a new way. Maybe you get bought by another company, and you get merged, and all of a sudden you've got all kinds of layers of procedures that you're supposed to do in terms of how you do work, and it creates waste. And it's not waste because somebody intended to have difficult processes. It's just a buildup. And so what we want to do is sort of clean the table and say, what do we really need to be successful in our company? So here's a few examples of things that we've sort of seen in our journeys that really, I think, from an HR perspective, I think you would all agree that really are evidence of waste, not necessarily within HR, but waste for the company, and how can begin to think about how can HR help to solve some of these problems. So we have a company where a new employee started in a consulting role, and it took 3 months to get a phone and a laptop. Ouch. This person was basically staying at home during this entire period, making no contribution to the company. Wow. Lack of linkage within the company about what the new employee needs. Here's another one. Here's an employee that was hired into a position that they were going to have to move from the U.S. to Europe, and there was no support for figuring out, what am I supposed to do if I'm going to move to Europe? This is a sort of a new thing for this company, and so there was no involvement, in terms of any help to get this employee relocated. There's another one where, there's a lot of attrition in one department at this global company, and they were constantly filling certain kinds of jobs in this one area, and yet every replacement there was no anticipation of this attrition going on. They would wait until there was an opening, and then there was a approval process that every single replacement had to be approved, and because the functional head was having so many replacements, he had somebody else review all of these before he would sign them. And so, just think about all those steps, and yet this was there was an ongoing need for replacements within that department, but every single one was treated like a one-off. And here's another one. This is a company that had, 2 different incentive programs within the company. It was not a huge company, so it was very obvious. And what was happening was employees, there would be job openings in the other part of the company that had the less favorable incentive program, and the employee would, I talked with one of these employees, and he said, I'm not going to apply for that job. Yeah, it'd be good for me. It'd be good for my career. It'd be good for the company because I have the right skills for it, but their incentive program isn't quite as good, so I'm not going to move over there. And that's within the same company. So here's a big gap on incentives. And here's another one where there was a policy that was put in place for really good reasons. It was that all open jobs had to be posted internally before they could be filled, and there was good reasons to do that. And we're trying to get away from favoritism and create an environment where employees could grow within the company. But unfortunately, their lean initiative started freeing up employees very quickly within the company, and they had a promise that they would not lay off their employees due to productivity gains, which is what most lean companies do. And so they had people that were freed up, but because the job posting was taking a 4-week process, they were non-productive during that entire period of time. So again, another example where some kind of change needed to happen. There needed to be a meeting of the processes between the HR process and the transformation that was happening in the rest of the company. Here's another example where we have, very tight union job classification. And within the lean activities, we were making it possible for, to do work at the rate of the customer. And so we were creating value streams, and we were finding it extremely difficult to realign the people into these cells because the work within the cells now encompassed more characteristics. And so, it's really hard to match what was the opportunity with the people that were there without having to rebid jobs. And the rebidding process really created a lot of continuous movement within the organization. So these are examples of things that because the organization is changing and going through lean transformation, creates issues that we really need HR to participate in to overcome some of these barriers. So those are just a few examples. So there's a lot more to it, and I thought what maybe would be helpful would be to, in this hour, is to help you get an idea of how can you go from, really being an observer of the lean efforts that are going on in the rest of the company to really being a partner with the lean efforts. What do I do? I'm sold. I want to do that. What do I do to get started? So let's talk about that. Well, the first thing, I think, is to create an expectation within the HR function and the organization is that if the triangle on the left is the way we're doing work today, most of it is transactional. We're posting job descriptions. We're interviewing people. We're conforming to EEOC. We're dealing with short-term disability issues. We're managing performance review process, etc. And little time for really analysis. There's some time, but not maybe that much on analysis of what does all these transactions mean? I mean, what does it mean that I'm constantly having to refill jobs in a particular part of the company? And then third of all, just a little bit of time on consulting, which is really about now that I know what I've analyzed, I know what's going on, how can I help improve the decisions that will improve performance in the future? The visual is, let's change that. What we want to do in our lean HR transformation is turn that upside down. We want to reduce the amount of time that we spend on transactional activities so that we have more time to spend on consultative activities. And that's the headline here. This is the, how can we do this? How can we engage the HR organization in a more meaningful way of improving the performance of the company in the future based on our expertise and capability we can bring to the organization. So if you want to do that, I would suggest that there's 3 goals to get started. One is you want to support this change that is going on in the rest of the organization. So if we're having people stand up to do their work now instead of sit down, how do I support that change? If we are becoming problem solvers, how do we help our supervisors not be firemen, but to really help develop a problem-solving environment. There's so many changes. So we want to support that change. The second thing we want to do is optimize the information that we're providing to the organization. So maybe if we're leading the performance management process for our company, making sure that performance management process is in alignment with what we're now wanting to do in the rest of the organization, and I'll give you a couple of examples show you some examples of that. And then the third thing we want to do is just actually eliminate waste within the HR function itself, so we have time to do those other 2 things. Because we're all busy right now. I know that. There's nobody sitting around on their hands in any companies I go in, and so we've got to eliminate we've got to make some change so we have time to do some of these other things. To accomplish those 3 goals, I'm going to go through fairly quickly these 10 strategies. And I'm going to do them quickly because there's a lot to learn about them, which is way more than we can do in an hour. But, I think that I want to expose you to some of these ideas so that you can begin to think about, okay, how do I want to get started in my company? What can we do in our company to become part of enabling our organization to realize the benefits of lean business systems. So I'm going to go through each of these 10. The first one is involvement. We need to make sure that we in HR are actively involved in the lean activities outside of HR. So, for instance, at our company, everybody in HR, accounting, and IT needed to be in at least 2 non-accounting HR, IT improvement events every year. So we want to be there. I even had an example where our HR manager became a member of the lean team of the company and put an acting person into the HR manager's role just so he could really engage with the organization, understand what this change is all about. I mean, that's fairly dramatic, but there are other things that you can do to really be part of it. If your company is having improvement event report out sessions, which is quite common, be there, be present, take that hour to go hear what's going on. If Kaizen or improvement events are going on, go be part of them, go observe what's going on, show interest in the changes. And by being there and being involved with the operations, lean activities, that is the absolute best way that you can find out how do we need to change some of the things that we do within HR? So even if you don't do anything else, number one, absolutely, is the first way to get going. Number two is we want to create a culture of continuous improvement within the HR function itself. We want to make sure that everyone in HR is reinforced, knows how important it is and how willing we are from a leadership role to say, hey, let's change the way we do things. You know, let's figure out if we can identify non-value add so that we can do it a new way. And really, I started each of my team meetings with my staff, every meeting with, what have we improved from last time? And I think that sets a very high message to your organization that you're really serious. You know, this isn't just something that's on your strategy document that says we're going to, you know, improve, we're going to do continuous improvement. It really is like a personal commitment. And so you could carry that even further, couldn't you, in your HR analyst type of role. Every time you're meeting with your business partners, you know, what are the kinds of things that you're changing? What are you doing differently? And really make that an important part of your conversation with your internal customers. Now, within that idea of creating a continuous improvement culture within the HR function, you know, you want every person to feel that, but you may also want to identify somebody either within the HR function or members outside the HR function into what we might call a lean leader role, somebody that's really trying to help make this change happen. And you can go outside and hire people with that type of skill. But I think, I really think that there are people within your company who will be motivated to really latch on to and to develop some of these skills. And so what makes a good lean leader? I mean, I think experience, knowledge, and skills within your company. They understand what makes your company, what makes your products and services, important to your customers. How do you do things? And somebody who's really open to change. They're not really locked into, well, we've done this for the last 15 years. They're more about, well, tell me about your idea. Maybe we could try it a new way. A good listener, somebody who doesn't, feel like they know what's going to come out of somebody else's mouth before they even say it. Somebody who is a good active listener, who pulls from people their ideas and really engages people. Somebody that their peers really like. You want people in this role that, other people in the organization like them. They like working with them. They look forward to the opportunity to interact with them. These people are people with some charisma and that other people respect. And, the fundamentals of lean, the tools and some of the thinking, we've all learned it. I didn't know it before I got started with it. But you just really want to try to identify those people who can think out of the box. So, this is an important thing that you probably want to understand about not only the lean leaders you want to create within the HR function, but to help the rest of the organization get the right people in the right jobs. The third strategy is really to attack waste within the HR function itself. Remember my triangles? If we can reduce waste within the HR function itself, it frees us up to do a lot of these other things. So try to find the things that you do in some repetitive way and really attack those. A Kaizen event, that may be a new term to some of you. A Kaizen is a Japanese word, good, zen, Kai, change for good events. An event is where you're bringing groups of people together to work 2 to 4 days nonstop on a process to make it better. And so you want to try to identify within the HR function. I'm going to give you a couple examples of this. But we really want to use some of the lean tools to eliminate waste and then just do it all over again. So there's a lot of things that we do in HR that we could apply this process to. And, I just put some here. There's a lot here, but I'm sure you could probably even think of more. But, in the area of staffing, how do we hire? How do we fire? How do we recruit? How do we do job descriptions? How do we do new hire orientation? I was with a company that wanted to improve getting engineers. They were growing and they needed more engineers, and getting an engineer in and up to speed and on projects was really important to them. And it was really interesting. The engineers, when asked, said, oh, yeah, the company had a great process. But behind the scenes, it was chaos. it was just taking a huge amount of effort to get that engineer, well, even once they were hired, not just to get them hired, but they've been hired, but actually to get them in their seat. And they did a Kaizen event, a week-long Kaizen event, cross-functional, with people from engineering, people from HR, from IT, accounting, et cetera, management, as well as direct line workers. And they did a Kaizen event, and at the end of the Kaizen event, they did a presentation. And one of the things they did, this was so fun, they actually did a little play. And they had the sheet up, which was behind the scene, and they showed the before and after, and it was really powerful. So even if the customer was having a good experience, behind the scene there was a lot of non-value add going on. Benefit area, I mean, great area to free up some time by looking at how do we do payroll, how do we do salary adjustments, how do bonus incentive programs work, and can we, get in and look at how we do them and take the waste out of it so we have time for other things, compliance issues, employee development. I realize I didn't put a slide in on this, but I think actually Kaizen events, now that I've mentioned the Kaizen events, are probably one of your number one ways in a lean company that you can find your future leaders. We all know how difficult it is to really figure out the skills of somebody through an interview. It's just so hard. But within a Kaizen event, you can actually see how people interact with each other, how change-oriented they are, how action-oriented they are. So I would, organizational development and Kaizen should be just like, totally like Siamese twins, connected at hip. So really a good opportunity. And then merger and acquisition activity. Think how big employee issues are in merger and acquisition. And so, getting involved and looking at how do you do that and can you take some of the waste out of those areas. So I just put this up to get your mind thinking of where could we apply lean. It's like lots of areas. Now, within the idea of applying lean thinking in our Kaizens, we're not trying to go for the big bang. We're really trying to take steps at a time, standardize the work. Remember Henry Ford standardizing those parts? We want to standardize so that we do each of these tasks in a more consistent fashion. And then do Kaizen, do improvement, change for good, whether it's a Kaizen event or whether it's daily Kaizen, and then use your new process for a while. Make it a habit, and then do it, make some additional changes. You're constantly changing, and this is what's happening in your lean organization. I'm going to give you an example of a couple of Kaizen events and that dealt with processes that HR is heavily involved with. This had to do with a requisition approval for a new hire. We were looking at salaried employees in the plants, and they were looking at from the time of creating a requisition until the employee's on payroll, and they wanted to have a 5-day requisition process, and they wanted to eliminate 15 non-value-add steps. Currently, the demand rate, in other words, how often did they need to approve a requisition, was 1 every 1.4 days. That was the customer demand rate. And they had 14 in March, 16 in April. The fastest they did it was 1 day. Well, we know how that happens, right? All the decisions really were made up front, and everybody just put the paperwork together. And the longest took 69 days, but their average was 21 days. They had incomplete information. The flow was inconsistent. They had a physical mail system that was moving these requisitions around. And it was approvals happened like they do in most companies, one at a time. One person signs it, and the next person signs it, and the next person signs it. They mapped the process out, and here's examples of, all the different steps that they were dealing with and who was involved. And it takes about, usually it takes about a couple hours to develop the current state process map with a nice cross-functional team. And then they looked at the steps, and they actually had very low levels of value-add ratio. 0.8% of the time were in the approval phase was value-add, and 5% in filling the job, and 1.1% in getting it into the system. But, in business processes like these in HR and accounting and IT, the value-add ratio is always really, really low, and actually a 20% value-add ratio is pretty darn good, to be honest. So the team felt by looking at the current state, wasn't blaming anyone, wasn't blaming the process. Hey, we really have some opportunity here. So they created this ideal state where the sites really understood what was going on, and they used the check and balance. And the employee relations person became the person who, if let's say a plant was getting less volume, perhaps even a plant was going to be closed, something as huge as that, but all the dynamics that could affect the openings. And so rather than having it to go through the serial process of approval, they made the job of the employee relations person to really understand those elements so that when job requests came available, not every single one, they were actually all going up to the VP of HR for this company, and they wanted it to take less than 2 days. So what they did is they consolidated the form to one page, they reduced the number of approvals, and they used voting buttons within Microsoft Office. It was a tool they already had, and rather than having serial approvals, each person got the request at the same time, and they could just using the voting buttons, it would go out to the other members on the requisition, and it could happen much, much more quickly. So this is just to give you an example of where they have lots of people who are approving the requisition. The plant manager, the regional manager, the divisional the divisional general manager, the executive vice president of ops, and the VP of HR. And then, if it was over 25,000, it went on to the head, the CEO. So in the future, if it was a budgeted replacement or a budgeted addition, it was going to be site manager and this employee relations manager who really understood the dynamics between the plans. And if it were a new hire, then it would go through a slightly different process. But you can see a lot of different handoffs. So they eliminated the VP of HR handling every single requisition, every single HR1, and all the related filing. They eliminated the physical mailing time. I'm getting lost. I'm sure we've all had that experience. You've done all this work on a rec. You've got half the signatures, and then it gets lost. So that got eliminated with the voting system. And they used this idea of a point person for the knowledge transfer rather than the approval route. So I thought you might think that was fun to see an example of one. They took it from 20 days to 2 days. They would need to comply. Obviously, compliance is an issue. They would need to monitor it. But they eliminated 38 of their steps. So you can see a lot of excitement, of the future state of the excitement of the team members. And in addition to solving that problem, they found a whole bunch of other things they might improve. And that happens all the time. You have an event, and then you say, oh, well, we could improve this, and we could improve that. And then they people. Remember, respect for people. The people in this Kaizen event, these some of their comments of, we were thinking out of the box. It was so important to get full team participation. The visual map showed steps of what happens other than me. And this could be applied to all areas of the company, into my personal life. And so now those people within HR really had a different appreciation of what was changing out in other parts of the company and really helped engage with supporting the change in the company. There were some more of their comments. We need to let go of the way we're used to doing things. Don't plan a process based on the exception. That's a great insight this week. Sometimes our biggest obstacles are ourselves. Boy, haven't I felt that way before. So let me give you another quick one. Won't take quite as much time on it. I don't want to use all of our time on this, but here was one. This company wanted to look at how they brought people on board and when people left. And basically, they felt that they could improve the effectiveness by creating standard processes. And it was for salaried companies. Anybody who was going to define it. You define your scope. And they set some objectives. These are not very time-based, or I typically would like to see a little bit more specificness in the objectives, but these were their objectives. And then they defined, what are we really talking about? And it was all these onboarding activities that were going on. And so we wanted to look at all those things. And we did this in a 4-day period. And then for the outboarding, again, there were all the things of onboarding you got to undo, but then there were a lot of other things. What do you do with payouts and vacation pay, and what if there was a search firm and there was a guarantee, or what about outplacement compensation? So all those things, they wanted to look at all those elements in a 4-day period. A lot of stuff. Here's our team. It's not the whole company. We've got 11 people here that were part of this team. And look what they were able to identify, that, they had 65 steps onboarding and 45 outboarding. And what's even more important is that people are like, I didn't know all those steps were going on. I only knew my steps. So they created flowcharts, they created standard work, they had a future state vision, and they picked a few things to improve. And these are some of the things that they improved, which was checklists so that everybody had the same checklist of what to do. They created early indicators so that when somebody was onboarded, it immediately went to all the key people that needed to know from both financial and IT perspective so that people could get their tools as quickly as possible. And they decided to use a system that they had for all the financial programs, because before they were having to go to a lot of different things with pay and benefits and employee receivables, et cetera. They would use one card, that sort of thing. And they also were able to reduce on the IT side because, they had a lot of, like, J. Smith. And so there was a lot of extra hand-holding to make sure they didn't delete the wrong person's email account. So they figured out by being part of this event that every employee had a unique employee ID number. So they could use that in IT versus having to have their own numbering system. Again, brought things closer together. Really great example of how by having accounting, HR, and IT together, looking at the process, I'd say they got some really good breakthroughs. So they eliminated 30 non-value-add steps, and they were very pleased that they could do that much work in 4 days, really quick. They had this whole SOX made me do it. There are a lot of things that they said, well, I have to do that for SOX. But when they actually got the people that were involved with SOX to say, do we have to do this particular thing, it really freed them up. We never want to just accept SOX made me do it or accounting said. We always want to, or even HR said, we want to make sure there's a real business reason. So this team really did a great job given the scope. They actually had it implemented when they walked out of their 4-day event. So that's a little bit about Kaizen events. I think they're an important part, not only for within the HR processes that HR is involved with, but also to go out and be part of those events in other parts of the company. Fourth strategy is really focusing on health and safety. A safe workplace is critical to lean success. We want to make sure that every employee goes home safely, and so that's where a place that we can make try to make sure that safety is a part of our Kaizen events, our improvement activities, but also the processes that we do in HR that focus on health and safety. So, looking at how do we do drug testing and employee monitoring, how do we deal with workplace accidents, how do we deal with workplace ergonomics, family leave programs, just typically lots of ways in these processes as well that we can help the organization. Here was an example. This is excuse me, at the shop floor, they really were needing employees to move between cells much more frequently. In the past, an employee had their own area that they worked on, and with the transformation, now the employees in manufacturing didn't have their own area. This is a big change for the people. They were so used to having their own area, pictures of their kids and all the things that happen in our offices as well. So one of the things that happened is in developing the new cells, they also didn't have chairs anymore to sit on to do their work, and the employees were required to stand and sit with the process. And employees started coming to HR and complaining about this new process. And think what would have happened if HR wouldn't have understood why these changes were being made. They would have potentially have commiserated with the employee, said, oh, yeah, we'll go find out what's wrong. And on the other hand, if they knew why it was happening by being part of it, it put the conversation much differently. And in fact, what this plant did is identified that they needed better padded flooring, new lighting because employees were up and moving so much, and to really help the employees through this change of why it was important as opposed to working against it. So I hope you can see from this is a very real-life example of where, without having that understanding of what is changing, really could take the organization in a direction that might be very difficult and pit HR and manufacturing at odds with each other. Certainly don't want that. The fifth strategy is really about talent acquisition and mobility. And really what we're trying to do in our lean organizations is constantly be in a mode of retraining our employees. We're not just about recruiting people with new skills, but you're taking the people that we have who know our company, who know our product, and retraining them for the new work that exists. We want to make sure that instead of focusing on hierarchies, that we're really focusing on creating an environment of empowerment that's beyond the functional descriptions of our roles. And if we're going to make the promise of no layoffs, we've also got to make the promise that everyone's job will change. And so I hope you can see with this different dynamic from sort of the traditional to the lean, it really forces us to completely rethink the work of HR and the work of HR in terms of how do we make it possible within the organization. And this is really what I would call a consultative role for HR. Is that not about reacting to needs for recruiting, for hierarchies, for job stability, but really creating an environment of a retraining environment, an empowerment environment, and job changes. And how do we support that in really everything that we do? Regarding workforce optimization, one of the big issues that you'll probably run into as your organization changes is that as you improve the quality of the work and take out the waste, you may find out that you've got more resource in an area that you need. And the naturally what we do as supervisors in the past and as managers, we're so used to, we interview a bunch of people and we'll pick the one that we think is going to work best in this job. But now we may have some freed up people in the organization, and we're always wanting to free up the best and brightest people in the organization. But those people do need to be placed, into new jobs, and that's a very different feeling for supervisors that they didn't pick the person. So really a challenge in doing workforce optimization. It's also really hard for a supervisor to give up their best and brightest. And if you're a supervisor or a manager, you probably have one or two people that you can always count on, and think how difficult it would be if by doing waste elimination you needed to free up that person. So there's a lot of help from HR to really make this possible. If we don't free up the best and brightest, we will really struggle as an organization in this redeployment activity. We want to support Hoshin Connery. What the heck is that? Hoshin Connery is about identifying the key elements of the company. It's really our strategic planning framework to what are the improvements we make to help us drive true strategic improvement in the company. And I know in our company, without going into it too long, this was really important to dedicate people to our strategic initiative. So it takes a lot of help from HR. How do we free up people and not backfill them and make that work within the organization? So this is a very big part of HR's role with Lean. I think I love this movie, this Christmas movie, and really it really does help us reflect back and sort of say, do we know the people that we've touched? And I think talent acquisition and mobility is really kind of like this. Is that sometimes at the moment it's so hard to see. We're dealing with all these problems. It's very hard to take that look back and say, how did we really help people move from one stage of their work life to another stage so that they can look back and realize what an impact that they've had. The sixth strategy has to do with employee development and retraining. As I mentioned at the beginning, we're needing to learn new skills. There's going to be, as we try to only manufacture the customer demand rate, there's going to be needs for more people in one area at certain times of the year than another part of the year. And there's lots of issues that can come up here that's very different. So I want to share with you just a couple of things that I've seen that has been really helpful in the kind of work that I'm talking about. For instance, here's one. This is a really neat company. I saw this up in Michigan that makes sort of customized products. They're well along in their lean journey within manufacturing, and so they have every morning their managers get around this board for the factory to if there's any people that won't be in for the day, they can look at the different skills across the top and that are needed to do particular jobs, and they can look down and they can see who has those capabilities, and they can optimize their workforce for the day. And also it helps them have a little bit longer planning. Like they don't have anybody right now that can do Skill 5. What are they going to do to develop Skill 5 and to fill that gap? And what if Tom's out? There will be no one to do Skill 1. So, and the radial dials, you may be familiar with the idea of defining, maybe a blank, no skill, quarter blank, certain amount of skill to a full circle can train other people, for example. Well, this is another really great example of a training program for a company where they had different levels, so you progressed to these different levels, but then they had areas like, they developed these cross-functional fundamentals, financial communications, and how they were going to deliver them. So in other words, they're creating a standard training curriculum that they could use to help managers decide what are the next courses, what are the next development things that need to happen with our employees. Now let's go to page 2 as well, because you can see they added in their lean and continuous improvement elements for employees to learn, as well as elements around human resources. So, I think this is a great example of a couple of things. One is the importance of ongoing retraining within the lean environment. 2, creating a standard that more people can, know, hey, this is how we want to move people through the education process. And 3, this is really a role that HR can help provide to the organization. And then 4 would be just that how lean learning, lean continuous improvement becomes a new part of training programs for the organization. Number 7, I know we're running close up to the time here, so I'll just quickly go through number 7. But number 7 has to do with the whole issue of performance management. And I think the big thing I'd like you to take from this one is that adding in behaviors, not just objectives. And here's an example. You can see in the middle, the top, they've got the normal objectives on a performance review. And in the middle, this company added in behaviors that they wanted to see. This isn't just about what you get done, but how you do it, and including that as part of their performance management. Compensation and benefits. This is, again, another really important thing that you may want to think about. For instance, if you're a pay-for-work perform, believe me, this is going to be an area that you're going to want to change. And if you're doing more retraining, am I going to get paid more if I can do more things? Or how are we going to set up our bonus program? Or I've been asked to move into a new job. What's going to happen? Will I get another raise? So these are some of the kinds of issues that, as you begin to move people around the organization, HR needs to be prepared to help deal with. Communication. Developing communication within the company. If we want to have continuous improvement with respect for people, improving the amount of communication that's going on in the company. Here's a company that actually had what they call the Navigator Award that would move around the organization to recognize leadership and their lean initiatives. So it's kind of a recognition program. And then the 10th strategy, of course, is then that culmination of the triangles, is to really become that consultative business partner, helping with company growth, retention, and acquisition efforts. So, these 10 strategies are helping to turn the triangle upside down. For you to decide is sort of what's next on your roadmap. What are you going to do? Do any of these 10 strategies work for you? There's a lot more to know about lean. Really have a plan. I really want to emphasize, we're so excited to be part of this Lean HR Summit. Dwayne and Butcher, Jim Hunsinger, have just led the way with Lean Accounting Summit. It's been so powerful within our function. So excited they've decided to do a Lean HR Summit. I get to help develop this. It'll be the first ever. It's going to be in Orlando, November 8th and 9th. And I really hope that you'll come. If you've done some great things, we'd love to hear about some stories, and we really hope and plan that this will be something that we'll do year after year to help our companies really engage the human side of lean. There are lots of books. I'm going to leave this book list up because we've kind of run out of time, so you can take a look at it while we do some questions and answers. But there are some additional books out there that you can gain additional knowledge. Dwayne, you want to take some questions?
Yes. So as you mentioned that HR should get involved in improvement activities throughout the organization, how should you go about doing that? Just insert ourselves, or is it better to be invited?
I think it's better to volunteer, which is sort of in between those two. I think that to go out to whoever's planning your next Kaizen event and say, we really want to be involved. Can we be part of it? And I think that's the best way to go about it. And then when you're part of it, stay fully engaged. One of the worst things you can do is say, go in and out. Just assume that you're and you will be, a full Kaizen team member and go be part of it. That's how I first got involved with Lean, and I just think there's no better way.
Okay, and you've kind of already addressed this other question, but it's basically, so what are some next steps?
Great. So I hope you got some next steps. So get involved and start looking within your area of what's a process that's a real pain, and see if maybe you can get some help from some people in the other parts of the company that are doing Lean to help you, or to go outside and get a coach or get a sensei to help you get started.
Okay. No other questions have come in, so.
Okay, then I'd like to close with this great quote from Nelson Mandela. He said, a leader is like a shepherd. He stays behind the flock, letting the most nimble go out ahead, whereupon others follow, not realizing that all along they're being directed from behind. We in HR can help direct from behind. We can help the entire organization be more successful and provide leadership. So I really encourage you to get involved and make a difference.
Okay. Jean, well, thank you. Thanks for your insights and your contributions to expanding Lean beyond manufacturing over the years. One important note, I wanted to mention that next week we're offering another webinar called Toyota Culture. So if you want to understand some of the philosophies and thinking that goes behind that culture, you're going to be able to hear directly from Mike Hoseas, who is an author on the subject and also a former HR manager at Toyota. So he brings some really interesting insights from his time at Toyota. So I'm going to include a link to the webinar in an email following this session, so you can look for that coming from me shortly. So thanks again, Jean, and thanks for everyone for participating in today's webinar. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.